Hello everyone, Rob Guest from football.london here and welcome to the latest episode of Gold and Guest Talk Tottenham, sponsored by NordVPN. Joining me today, it's Alasdair Gold. You well?
Yeah, I'm all right, thank you. Hope you are too. Loads to talk about. We kind of try to do 2 pods a week if we can. But actually, you kind of think in the off season that might not be as easy. But Spurs are giving us plenty to talk about. So yeah, we've got loads to fit into another podcast.
Yeah, we've got the new Premier League fixtures. They came out today, so we've got those to discuss first up. Then we've got the video that appeared on Tottenham's social media channels last night of Daniel Levy and Venkatesham discussing all things Tottenham. Matisse Tell has signed permanently, and also I think we're hoping there's going to be a Thomas Frank interview at some point. Whether that drops later today or later this week, we'll find out soon, but I'm sure we'll be back later in the week to discuss it if that's the case. So first up with Tottenham's 25-26 Premier League fixtures. Burnley at home first. Decent start for Thomas Frank, the new manager. Then it's Manchester City away, Bournemouth at home, West Ham away, Brighton away, and Wolves at home in the first 6 games. Thoughts, Ali, first of all?
I keep going back and forth. I can't decide whether it's a good start or a trickier one than people think it is. I mean, yes, of course, if you could pick any fixture, you're going to pick a home game against a promoted side as your opening game. Of course you are. Man City away is not a nice one for your second game. However, it's the old cliche, I suppose. If you're going to play someone or a big side, you probably want to get it a bit early before they've set into their kind of way and their way of playing. But of course, Spurs are going to be like that as well under their new manager, Thomas Frank. Then the games after that, there's kind of games that, they're not the kind of the worst possible games, but I just kind of feel like they're quite tricky ones. You know, Bournemouth, West Ham away, Brighton away, even Wolves. They're a different entity nowadays, aren't they? You could see that in the last 6 months of the season, or 4 or 5 months of the season or so. Even Leeds United away. It's. I know they're a promoted team, but Ellen Road with the noise there. I don't know. It's one of those where I'm sure people are saying, "Oh, come on, be more positive," kind of thing. And I get that. I think maybe the season we've just had in the Premier League has drilled into me to fear every single game in the Premier League. But I think it certainly could have been a lot worse for Thomas Frank. He could have had a lot of the big boys early on in the first 5 or 6 games, and that could have been a bit disastrous as he's trying to get some momentum. So happy enough. The scary thing is, as we had to do today, is adding in all of the Champions League fixtures and the potential cup games, the FA Cup and Carabao Cup, and how mad the season is going to be again. I mean, obviously, Champions League alone, you've definitely got a guaranteed 8 matches to be fitted in. There are so many weeks when it's a game every 3 to 4 days. And I tell you what, that squad's going to have to be very big and very decent. Otherwise, we're going to have a repeat of last season in terms of having to prioritise and no one wanting to prioritise.
Yeah, I think it's a great set of fixtures to start the season. I really do. I agree with you. I think Burnley at home, ideal opener for Thomas Frank. Different story if it's at Turf Moor, but you'd fully back Spurs to win on home soil. I think it's a good time to play Man City, especially because they're at the Club World Cup at the moment. They could go into mid-July. Into that, you just don't know how much time they're going to have off after that and what their fitness levels are going to be like. And it is going to be a new look Man City. They've signed Cherky from Lyon, Reinders from AC Milan, Aït-Nouri from Wolves. So I think it's a good time to play him, especially because they shouldn't really be at full speed at that point and could be feeling the effects of the time at the Club World Cup. Then Bournemouth at home. I know Spurs have struggled against them at home in recent years, but that's certainly a winnable game and one where Bournemouth could look slightly different. I mean, there's been a lot of talk of Semenyo leaving, Kirkes as well. West Ham, I don't think they're particularly great, but Spurs again struggle at the London Stadium. Brighton away is a tough one. Wolves at home, you think it's a nice one.
Spurs struggle at home against Wolves for some reason. They do.
But I think if you're looking at those fixtures, I'd rather have those than be facing City, Liverpool, Arsenal, Newcastle, Villa, teams like that, all in a row.
Haven't Arsenal got a bit of a tough start? I think you were having to work on that, weren't you, today?
Arsenal have a really tough start. I think they've got Man United away, Leeds at home. Then they've got a run of 4 games where it's Liverpool away, Forest and City at home, Newcastle away. So that could be, could impact their aspirations so early in the season. So I think for Spurs, it's a good start, and getting off to a good start, he's going to be winning games and building momentum. And that's what Thomas Frank will be looking to do.
Absolutely, he has to get off to a good start. There's question marks surround the decision to change him among sections of the fan base. He's got to kind of quickly dispel all of that, hasn't he? He's got to get in there and say, look, this is what we're going to do. There are a couple of sticky points during the season, which are going to be very interesting when we come to them. There's that little period in November when there's potential of Carabao Cup 4th round if they get through to the next stage, because they all enter the 3rd round, don't they, European teams? So you've got Carabao Cup 4th round. Couple of days later, Spurs against Chelsea. Couple of days later, Champions League match day 4. Couple of days after that, Tottenham versus Man U. Then you've got the international break, but then you go straight into the first North London derby away from home at the Emirates, followed very swiftly by another Champions League match day as well, a couple of days later. So that's not pleasant. And there's a even more unpleasant, I would say, little period coming up in, I think it's July going into February. July going to January going into February. That's a long period. January, February, where you go from, I've got it here. Here we are. 28th of January, Champions League match day 8. So the final game of the group stages, which could be huge. It could decide what you're about to do next. You go straight from that 3 days later into Spurs Man City, then a potential Carabao semi-final second leg, but that's very much potential, of course. But then you're going straight into Man U versus Spurs, Tottenham versus Newcastle, then a potential FA Cup 4th round, then a potential Champions League knockout phase playoff first leg, then the next North London derby, and then Fulham away after that, sandwiching potentially the second leg of a playoff again. That is a horrendous little run of games of about 7-8 games potentially. Again, it'd be lovely if we can just get to that point, and all of those games are on the calendar, because that means Spurs have done well up to that point. But look, I know the old cliche everyone says you've got to play every team twice. It's the way it is. But there are definitely groupings of games that can help with momentum and things like that. So I think that's the key word for Thomas Frank this season, is to get some momentum behind the team, because they never really got it last season in the Premier League, and they need it this time around.
Some other key dates in the calendar over the festive period: Tottenham not leaving London at all. There's Crystal Palace on December the 27th at Selhurst Park. December the 30th, they're going to Brentford. Thomas Frank's first game back at Brentford since taking on the Tottenham job. Then 3rd of January, Spurs have Sunderland at home. Last game of the season, Everton at home.
The biggie, the title decider.
Well, that might be a good omen, What happened the last time Spurs played Everton on the last day of the season?
Oh, crikey, when was that? Remind me.
2019.
Was that what it was? Oh, yeah, of course it was. Yeah.
They had a Champions League final to look forward to a couple of weeks later.
They did. It didn't go so well, but yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, it meant stuff was happening. I swear that the game before Christmas is always Spurs against Liverpool right now. I could be wrong, but it just feels like we've had that a fair few times in recent seasons, and it's the case again this year on the 20th. Currently the 20th, Spurs against Liverpool at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Should stress, as always, any of these dates could move with the various cup competitions and European games. Times could change. Although they've announced, we were talking about this earlier, weren't they? They've announced quite a few midweekers already. There's like 4 or 5 of them.
Yes. 3rd of December, Newcastle away, 8 p.m. Nice local trip for all the Tottenham fans.
That's just mad. That is absolutely mad. Why is that a midweek night fixture?
But then Newcastle have to come to Tottenham Hotspur Stadium for a midweek game in February. Another 8 p.m. one. There's a couple of.
But that doesn't fix it by going, "Hi, you've got to do it as well." It's like, no, I'm not blaming you. I'm blaming the the scheduling. It's just incredibly stupid when it comes to stuff like
ridiculous. And then over the festive period, the Brentford game, that's down for 8 p.m. Bournemouth away. Another bit of a long trip. That's 7th of January. That's 8 p.m. and Crystal Palace at home start of March, 8 p.m. So
But that's
yeah,
fine.
there's quite a few in the schedule already. These dates not set in stone yet.
No.
The only one that is the opening game, Saturday 3 p.m. Obviously, Sky and TNT didn't want to show Tottenham versus Burnley on telly. But there you go.
Crazy.
Yeah. But having a read on the Premier League website earlier, I think the rest of the games for August and September are due to be announced by, I think it's the 9th of July. So a couple more weeks, then those batch of games will be decided whether they're on TV or not.
Would you make a Stamford Bridge visit as the penultimate game in the season?
Tough one. But I
Mm.
mean, the past couple at Stamford Bridge have been around that time. It
Yeah,
was
roughly.
April last season. Previous year, I think that was the start of May as well. Not an ideal one, especially if you're in the battle for top four or even something greater than top four. But Spurs never win at Chelsea, did they? So whether it'll change this season or not, I don't know.
I mean, Bobby, our Chelsea report, was telling us, wasn't he, like Chelsea's end of the season is a bit horrendous. It's not a great kind of end of season fixture. I think they got a lot of the big boys kind of bunched up towards the end. So maybe Spurs can take advantage of that.
Yeah, and they've got Villa away in May as well. That always seems to be the case as well.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it does.
Has been in recent seasons. You do tend to get fixtures what roughly stay around the same mark every year, and yeah, we've seen a few of those. So I think that's it for all the fixture talk. Unless there's anything
You were
else
just
you want
finishing
to
the
add.
podcast.
No?
That's it. We're done. No, I don't. I was just looking down. You kind of get overexcited when you add in the kind of fixtures that are potentials. So, like, even when you were talking about Villa, I was looking at the fixtures and going, "Oh yeah, that's sandwiched by Champions League semi-final, first leg and second leg." It's like, why are you getting ahead of myself? I think that's the beauty of having got far in Europe and won a competition for a change, that you kind of actually look quite far ahead now. I think, you'd hope Spurs would get through to those playoffs at least. It's so many teams go through now. It's not a definite, but was it top 8 go through automatically? I think that's obviously going to be a tougher task in the Champions League with the quality within it. But still, I was just looking about any others there that's massive to kind of keep an eye on. I always forget how early the Carabao Cup final is. 22nd of March. That would see the Spurs versus Forest game booted from that weekend if Spurs were to get that far. Hey, look, I'd settle for a UEFA Super Cup, to be honest, right now, as the first competitive game of the Thomas Frank era. But yeah, it's going to be another busy one for you and me and all the fans, of course. With there is going to be games here, there, and everywhere. I mean, we had 60 matches last season, competitive ones, 65 in all if you're counting the friendlies. If Spurs can get to that level of games again, then they've done very well, hopefully. Yeah, it's. I think the most fascinating thing about it all is when you see it laid out in paper is just what a hugely different thing it's going to be for Thomas Frank. He's going to have to get used to managing in so many different competitions, using so many different players. It's not a gradual learning process for him. He's not going into it with a few more games. There's potentially 10 to 15 more games than he's used to in a season. So he's going to have to learn quick. But to be fair, everything about his career thus far suggests that he learns quite quickly in jobs. So fingers crossed he does again.
It's exactly what you want, though. A packed fixture schedule. I mean, go back 2 seasons. Ange's first year. What was that?
Yeah.
41 games across the season. And I think from a reporter point of view, covering Tottenham, it was boring.
Rubbish.
It was.
It was
We've
rubbish.
just been so used to doing European games
Yeah.
every season. I think that probably makes people appreciate them a lot more, having had a season like that. But yeah, packed schedule is what everyone wants. And you mentioned the Super Cup. That is going to be a bit of a quick turnaround. I thought Spurs might have been the Sunday with the Super Cup game being the Wednesday, but
I
no.
didn't think about that. Yeah, that's set now, isn't it?
Yep,
City,
that's not the case. Right then.
City, sorry, Burnley.
Yes. Yesterday we had a bit of a surprise interview on the Tottenham website. and the YouTube channel. One we certainly weren't expecting, and it was with Daniel Levy and Vinay Venkatesham. There's been, I think, a lot of talk about what Daniel Levy said, what Vinay said as well. I think Vinay came across really, really well in the interview, which was about 7 minutes long. I know you've done a big piece on it today. You were watching it as well last night. Immediate thoughts on it?
Something that's desperately needed was my first thought. It's regardless of the content or what people want to make of what was said and things like that. First off, it's doing exactly what we've all called for. It's having some communication. It's just having something, some explanation of decisions. And I actually felt it kind of, I think these things are quite key to humanizing the people that make these decisions as well, is because it's easy to kind of create caricatures of people, and especially with a club that doesn't really speak. We see these twice yearly statements, as it were, from Daniel Levy, one in the chairman's message, one in the financial report, and that's all he kind of becomes. He becomes this person you see sitting aloft above everyone on a match day, or he's just this bank of words that he's kind of comes out with twice a year. So I think to see something like this probably helped him a fair bit. I think it definitely humanized him. I think it showed hopefully what an important addition Vinay Venkatesham is going to be. He, as you said, is a really, really good talker, came across really well, tried to clarify things in what he was saying. Obviously, we don't know kind of how long the original interview was. It might have been like a 2-hour special and we got 7 minutes, so I don't know. But certainly the way he came across was very impressive, to be honest. And that's something that's not a shock to us, because we were told this from people that covered Arsenal, and Arsenal fans, I think, took to him quite a lot as well. And there was certainly, I saw some of the statements when he left the club a year ago, that their supporters trust and various fan groups were disappointed he was leaving, because he'd made a real kind of point of trying to bring the club and the fans back together again, or together again. And that's something that Spurs, let's be honest, the fans and the board and the hierarchy have not always been the closest. So if he can kind of bridge that gap, he said in this that he's got kind of meetings lined up with the Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust, with the Fans Advisory Board as well, and I'm sure he'll be meeting other kind of prominent kind of fan groups in the months ahead as well. And that's what it's all about. That is what it was all about. What did you think about the kind of the chemistry between the two of them? Like a bit of a budding bromance.
Yeah, well, they've quite clearly known each other for years, and I think Daniel mentioned that bringing Vinay Venkatesham into work with him wasn't like a risk, really, because he knows exactly what he can bring to the club, and they do quite clearly like a glass of red wine. I think that's what Daniel mentioned. But I know a lot of people have pointed to that, but I think that shows the human side to him as well, and that's something we just don't see, because, as you mentioned, it's usually two statements, or you see his face on TV when results aren't going well, and the camera usually pans to him quite a few times during the game. And I think this is something fans have been crying out for. I just wonder if it's something Vinay maybe has persuaded him to do, just because we've seen when he was at Arsenal, bringing the fans and the club closer together, and that's exactly what Spurs need to be doing, and it looks like they're already making big strides in that area.
Yeah, it could well have been something that he kind of pushed for. Maybe it was, and again, this is just massively kind of speculating and wondering out loud. Maybe it was meant to be an interview with Vinay Venkatesham to introduce him to everyone, and perhaps he suggested, maybe it should be the both of us kind of thing. And yeah, I wasn't entirely sold on the whole wine part of it. There was a few kind of mentions of red wine, and it was a little bit like, I can imagine someone off the side of the thing, kind of like putting a hand across the throat. No, change the subject. Stop talking about red wine. You're supposed to be a man of the people, kind of thing, or we want you to be a man of the people. But yeah, like you said, I absolutely agree. I do think it was a light-hearted moment, and that's the thing. Those are the things that kind of humanize. And I think probably one of the most interesting parts of the early stages of the interview for me was that he admitted they don't really agree much on stuff. And I actually thought that was, I think this gives me hope that he's not going to be someone that kind of just puts this kind of shine on things at the club and, oh, everything is wonderful kind of stuff. Because maybe that's been something that's been associated with the club over the years, that certainly a perception from the outside, and certainly some people within it as well, that Daniel Levy maybe has a very clear idea of what he wants things to be, and that perhaps people around him maybe go along with that or will agree with that. And that means that there's kind of been a main sole voice for the last 24 years or so. Whereas the fact that he's coming in, and I'll read the quote he said. This is Vinay Venkatesham. He said, "It's not to say we always agree. We often disagree and we often challenge each other. But I think that's a good thing. And I think by working together, we'll get to better answers." And I thought that was a really kind of interesting way of putting it. And maybe that kind of heralds a slightly different era at Tottenham Hotspur, where there is, more of a. It kind of makes it sound like I just want someone to constantly argue with Daniel Levy, and that's not the case. It's more just having lots of different viewpoints, bringing in fresh eyes onto something. You've certainly the people at the very top at Spurs. There's been some people up there that have been there for a long, long time, and I don't think there's any bad thing in a major organisation from having some fresh eyes, some fresh voices, and thoughts on things. And he's going to do that. He's going to bring in stuff that worked at Arsenal. He's going to bring in stuff that he found didn't work at Arsenal, and he'll be able to see stuff at Spurs, and he'll be kind of like, "Why are you doing that?" Or he'll see stuff that maybe was a better way of doing it than they were doing down the road. So I don't think there's any bad thing to him coming in whatsoever, unless he's an undercover spy brought to destroy Tottenham from within, which I very much doubt is the case. But yeah, I thought that side of it was really interesting. There was a little section of it where it started to become a bit kind of backslapping, and it was all kind of, it got very nicey nice about each other, which is fine. It does, like you say, it shows a relationship they've had over the years. But I think for me, it's certainly, this interview is going to be remembered and defined by what came at the very end of it. Actually, before I move on to that, what did you think about the bit about Ange Postecoglou when you spoke about him?
Interesting, especially the bit where he says he doesn't regret appointing Ange. I mean, why would you? He's just won the first trophy the football club's won in 17 years. But he also mentioned that it wasn't just his decision, was it, to part with him? It was a collective decision, and one which was emotional, but one ultimately they feel is the best move for the football club. And just on that as well, they went into depth really about Thomas Frank, bringing him in. When it came to a new Tottenham manager that had 10 characteristics to look for in a Spurs manager. I think, with the saying, Johan Lang had about 30 names down.
Yeah.
And the number one was Thomas Frank.
Yeah.
And obviously, he's come in, really good communicator, really good football man, good ideas, done really well at Brentford, and everyone seems to be really, really happy with him. And I think, given the mentioned he's a good communicator, Tottenham fans and everyone else just wants to hear from him now.
They do. Hopefully we'll get that in the not too distant future. He is meant to be starting, or certainly being around the club this week, so hopefully we should get something. I thought exactly that. I thought the two sections about the outgoing and incoming head coach were quite, there was a lot you could take from them. I think certainly I was absolutely with you on the Ange comment, and I know I had a ton of messages last night about that as well. It's like when he said, "I don't regret appointing Ange." Exactly. Why would you? Why? He literally has just snapped in half the stick that everyone used to beat Daniel Levy with, that he didn't win trophies. He's just won a European trophy for you. So it was almost like he was talking about Nuno. It was like a really strange kind of way to start talking about him. I mean, to be fair, the early words were, "I'm very grateful to Ange," but he then went straight into, "I don't regret appointing Ange." It's like, no, nobody was saying you should. I don't know where that kind of came from. Guys just delivered a trophy and given us all a night and a parade we'll kind of never forget. But I think the Thomas Frank stuff was a nice bit of clarity, nice bit of behind the scenes stuff that we don't always get. To kind of, and also the fact that he said we ran a really, really thorough process at speed. It's an interesting one. Can you run a really thorough process at speed? I don't know how that works, but I don't know. I mean, it took long enough in 2021, didn't it? So I'd rather a thorough process at speed than a kind of meandering process at the a snail's pace. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting, that sort of stuff about the two managers as well. And I think in any other kind of form, you could have finished the interview around the 5.5 minute mark, and that kind of would have had a lot of the stuff that you would want to see in it. Then we had this little extra bit where they started to talk about how broad Daniel Levy's shoulders were. And you always kind of feel like when someone says their shoulders are broad and their skin is thick, you kind of think, do you have to tell us that? Because it kind of almost seems like you're talking about the criticism you get. I always find that quite funny when people say those things. And then it led into, didn't it, these big, grand statements that we got right at the end of the video.
Yeah, one of them was winning the Europa League isn't enough. Daniel Levy stated he wants the club to be winning the league, winning the Champions League. I mean, Spurs haven't really been close, really, to doing either. Didn't really show
Champions
up,
League,
did they?
yes.
Champions League final. Got to the final, which is great, but in terms of the game, not the greatest performance.
Yes.
In the Premier League, went close a couple of times during Poch's reign, but since then, got nowhere near doing it. But all it's done is just up this pressure on Daniel Levy now to splash the cash this summer and upgrade this squad so it can compete. Well, not only compete in the Premier League and Champions League, but try and win it.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, well, when I say about winning the Champions League, I think you would probably imagine more over the coming seasons for that one. But certainly, I would agree that on top of his comments about we have to compete in all competitions, multiple competitions, I do think this was a huge. It's almost like he took a load of the pressure, and maybe this was purposefully. I don't know. Took a load of the pressure off Thomas Frank and put it on himself, on those big broad shoulders that we keep hearing about. Yeah, I thought that was kind of a fascinating way to end it all. I don't know whether it was all planned like that and that was always what was meant to be said, or whether he just kind of got really excited in the moment and then came out with something and were like, wow, let's keep it in for now. But yeah, I mean, the full kind of comment here, he was talking about the final whistle when it went in Bilbao, and he said it was such an amazing experience, and you saw the outpouring of emotion with the parade. It was just incredible. We've won a European trophy. It's not enough. It's what we haven't done that's more important. We need to win the league. We want to win the Premier League. We want to win the Champions League. We want to win. That's so strong. That is probably the strongest we've heard him speak on anything. And for me, it kind of felt like the kind of thing you hear a new owner or a chairman coming into a club saying, as if like, that's what we're going to do. We're here to do that. Not someone that's had 24 years already to try and achieve that. It's quite interesting when you look at it like that. It's kind of, I can understand why some fans will kind of find that a little bit hollow. I think some fans will certainly say, well, this is words. We've heard you use words before. Where are the actions? And yeah, they have come close to doing it a couple of times. The years that Leicester and Chelsea won the Premier League, and of course 2019 and Champions League. But they've been more exceptions than the norm of those 3 seasons. So ultimately, it is exactly like you said. It's down to him providing a squad that can achieve what he's stating needs to be achieved. And that's down to him. That's down to investment in the club. That's down to, look, it's all very well kind of essentially having a side bursting with young talent, but that's not enough on its own. It just isn't. You've got to have some, even the Man U side that everyone talks about, can't win it with kids. They had some big players in among those young players, some big experienced, top of the game kind of players. And if he's now expecting Thomas Frank to do what he believes Postecoglou couldn't, which is compete across all competitions, well, I mean, it's there. He couldn't do that. He had to prioritize. He's going to have to give him some big weapons for his armory. Like we've just said, we've talked about that fixture list. It's insane again. And it's Spurs. There will be injuries. There will be problems across this season. We will be talking about various players missing certain games. And I think the clearest comparison you've got now is you've got Postecoglou came in, made a very clear statement. I always win things in my second season, and then he went and did it. And now Daniel Levy has made his own very clear statement, which is we want to win the Premier League, we want to win Champions League. He kind of now has to deliver, or at least provide the tools for a manager to at least try to do that. And if he does that, then no one can really complain about it. But if it is just more of the norm, where it's like a team for the future, here's like a cheaper, younger version of the player that maybe you actually wanted, then that's not going to fly. And everyone's just going to keep coming back to these quotes and say, well, you made this big deal about this, but ultimately it was only words. So I do think he's ramped up the pressure on himself even more to deliver. And it's going to be very interesting to see what the coming weeks brings and who comes through that door. Because look, they have spent money in the past, just not on the kind of players that were the right players for the time to push them on. And that's going to be a key thing for this summer as well, getting the right players as well.
So maybe Tottenham for the quintuple then, come May, win the Super Cup and the other 4 trophies.
Can you imagine if he is Daniel Levy at the parade next season? He just grabs the mic and just repeats a version of the Ange speech. I said it and they mocked me, and then he just like drops the mic and walks off with
season
sunglasses on.
Season 25 is always better than season 24.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Season 1's always better than season 2. Yeah, you could do it the other way around. Yeah, it's huge kind of pressure he's put on himself. But hey, by his own words, he doesn't care about that sort of thing. So I'd be interested to see whether this new open kind of way that hopefully we're going to get under Vinay Venkatesham as well leads to some interviews on the pre-season tour. Maybe with him, maybe even with Daniel Levy. Who knows? But I would say it's very, very likely you'd think we'll get to speak to Vinay Venkatesham on the tour, because I'm sure that'll be seen as a good opportunity for him to introduce himself and kind of talk about what he's found out about the club in the first month or so of his time. I'm not so sure on Daniel Levy, but it would be great if he did, because again, it's just another attempt to explain and humanize, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
On the subject of the tour, with Tottenham heading over to South Korea and Hong Kong, I'm sure you're going to be using Saily whilst you're over there, our sponsor.
I was wondering how we're going to get round to that. You've done well there, very well. Yes, of course I'll be using Saily. I mean, my mobile network costs heading across to Asia would be absolutely crippling. They'd be very expensive. Well, the company would have to pay them, no doubt, because it's a work thing. But I certainly, to help them out, and because I always use it, will be using Saily, which, if you're not aware, if you haven't heard recent weeks, it is a terrific service from NordVPN. NordVPN, which I just use normally anyway to connect to things abroad, making my device thinking it's abroad if I want to kind of see things from abroad, or making it think it's in the UK when I am abroad to watch stuff back home. Saily is an entirely different part of their service. It's like it is an eSIM really, which you can use when you're abroad to save you tons of money over what your roaming costs would normally be with your network. And it is great. I've used it in various continents actually, and it is very, very good. It does everything you need it to, and it does it for a fraction of the cost as well. Can only recommend it entirely really, which is always nice when you're kind of talking about someone that's involved, a partnership that the pod's got, when you can actually say you've used it and it's been a huge success for you. And on top of all of that, of course, as we always do on Gold and Guest Talk Tottenham, we can get it for you for a cheaper price as well. So you can download Saily, which is spelled Saily, in your app store, and you can use our code GOLDGUEST at the checkout, and that will get you an exclusive 15% off your first purchase. Or you can go online and go straight to saily.com/goldguest. And for more information, please go to our episode description box.
On the subject then of the pre-season tour, Tottenham have already got a new permanent signing in through the door. Second one this summer, following on from Kevin Danzo's permanent move to the club, and that is Matisse Tell. So hopefully he'll be playing a big part for Spurs in pre-season and beyond. I mean, when he signed on loan from Bayern Munich, there was that permanent option to sign him for 45.7 million. At the time, it was already stated that he had agreed on a 6-year deal at the club, but then it was just down to the club sanctioning that permanent move, and that's exactly what happened on Sunday. For a cheaper fee, as well, which I think certainly works for Spurs. Was it roughly around 30 million?
29.8, yeah, 35 million euros. So they whacked 15 million pounds off the original option.
Yeah, I think it's a really good signing, to be honest. I know we didn't really see the best of him during his first 4 months at Spurs. We certainly saw glimpses, but certainly a committed player. Works really, really hard down the left wing. Maybe things didn't always come off for him in terms of the goals and assists, but I think the 4 months he's had, he's going to stand him in really good stead. I'd probably liken it to the Lucas Moura deal in 2018. I thought when he first came in, again, he showed glimpses of his quality and then really, really kicked on the following season. And I think that helps, just having that 4-month period to adjust to your new team, your new surroundings, then go into a full pre-season, and then you hit the ground running. And he's someone that's 20 years old. There's still so much more to come from him. And we've seen how Thomas Frank likes to develop these young players. He could take him on to another level altogether. And I think 30 million in the current market, if he can reach the levels we believe he can, that could be a really, really good piece of business for Spurs.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there was always the thought that he was likely to stay. However, that means nothing if the incoming manager says no. As he absolutely had every right to do, he could have vetoed it and he could have said, no, I think I could get someone better for that. But it's not, and I'm sure people will instantly think, well, he's just been told to take him and he will. And it's, from what I understand, it's not that at all. He had a proper look into him, analysed him quite heavily to see whether, what he could do with him, how he fit his system and everything. And he kind of came back pretty much excited about what he was going to do with this player. And he feels that he can take Tell to kind of greater heights. Because look, he's got all of the basic tools, Matisse Tell. He's a very talented young player. And I do feel like people overlook the fact that he was thrown into a new league and culture and life as a teenager at the time as well, told to play up front because there was no one else, got battered by defenders. And I thought as the season came towards its conclusion, we got to see a lot more of him and he actually looked better. He looked sharper. He looked quite positive in his performances. Won the penalty on the last day, didn't he, as well, against Brighton that Solanke put away. And I think you could see there's a real foundation there to work with. And when you've got someone like Thomas Frank, who, we know worked his way through the Danish kind of youth setup in the FA there and has worked with some really good young players and brought them along at Brentford as well, he's going to be able to take someone with all of that. I mean, this is a player that Bayern spent 30 million on like 17-year-old because they knew how good he was going to be. This isn't just some random kind of signing. It is someone there's been a lot thought of him over recent years. It just didn't quite work out for him at Bayern. His first year was pretty decent. I think he got 16, maybe his second season, he got 16 goal involvements. Next season, obviously, was a little bit more stop-start, as it can be with young players. We've seen it with ones at Spurs where they'll have a really good time, and then the next season they'll dip slightly. But with Tell, I think there's a lot there to be worked with. And yeah, I mean, the figures, like you said, £15 million knocked off that. I think there's a potential €5 million extra, which is 4.2 if he meets certain targets over the years ahead. It should also be pointed out they paid, which I thought was quite expensive, £8.5 million for that half-season loan, €10 million. It's kind of, overall, it could be quite a pricey deal in that respect, but still, in today's market, probably not that much, especially if he goes on and absolutely smashes it, which we hope he will. I think I've been speaking to a lot of people kind of with a lot of knowledge about him. And yeah, there's a feeling that he's very kind of strong technically, and he's got an excellent training mentality as well behind the scenes, really positive character, influence on the squad as well. And I think there was a lot of fitness work had to be done with him last season as well. He hadn't played a lot of minutes at Bayern, so he was coming in and having to have that improved from the off, really, and strengthening as well for the Premier League. He's good in 1v1 duels even. We've seen him kind of getting past players quite easily at times. I think he could benefit from a little bit extra strength. I think that's clearly going to come and just improve those moments. His finishing needs work, absolutely. There was a few moments when we saw him get into good positions and not make the most of those. But I think from what I understand, do you remember his performance against Forest at home towards the end of the season? I think that was held up internally as that's what we want him to be. He was probably one of the best player on the pitch, especially first half in that game. And I think there's a feeling that that's what they want to build on. They can harness that kind of side of him, and he can be more than just an impact player. But either way, I think we're talking about building a squad, and he is a guy that I've seen a lot of people kind of talking about other players, and rightly so, because there's some terrific players, but people may be forgetting about Matisse Tell. He's got Champions League experience. He's coming into these competitions not overawed by it in any way. He's played for one of the biggest clubs in the world. He has played in the Champions League. He scored in the Champions League. He's the kind of guy that's going to come into those competitions and not fear it in any way. And I just think it's a win-win deal. I really do.
Yeah. I think, does he have Europa League experience as well from when he was at Rennes? Obviously, he's played in the competition for Spurs this season, but I think when he was at Rennes, that was the season they played Spurs when Nuno was manager. Conference League, sorry.
I think you're right. Yes, because he left just before Jed went. It was the season before Jed went to Rennes, didn't he?
So he's had that European experience from a really young age, and he's still a young lad now. And that performance against Forest, that was his standout display of the season at Spurs. He was brilliant that night. And I think the first half, was it Spurs either had 8 chances and he was involved in all of them, or was involved in 8 out of 10 chances.
Yeah,
So
he was very heavily involved.
That just shows what he can do, but there's still so much more to come from him. And I think Thomas Frank will be able to extract it out of him, which is only a good thing for Spurs going forward.
And he's versatile, isn't he? That's the thing. With a guy that likes to change his tactics and formations, he can play in a 4-2-3-1. He can play in a 4-3-3. He can even play in a 4-4-2 if he wants to as well. You could see him on the side. You could see him as a support striker. He's going to offer him so many options.
Yeah. Right, I think that's it for today's latest episode of Golden Guest Talk Tottenham. I think we will hopefully be back later in the week, and fingers crossed we'll be able to speak about Thomas Frank's first interview as Tottenham manager. We're still waiting, almost a week on from his appointment now.
It'll be a good one, though, won't it? I'd imagine.
Yeah, I imagine it'll be better than what Nuno's couple of minutes. So we'll make you proud.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he's a communicator. He'll talk very well, I think, Thomas Frank.
Yeah, it should be a good one. I think it's one all Tottenham fans are desperate for. That's what you just see in the comments at the moment.
Yeah.
When's Thomas Frank going to speak for the first time? But yeah, hopefully very, very soon. So in the meantime, just keep with us at football.london for all your latest Tottenham news. You can either download Sailor in your app store and use our code GOLDGUEST at the checkout to get an exclusive 15% off your first purchase. Online, you can go straight to sailor.com/GoldGuest. For more information, please go to our episode description box.